Samir Halalway is the CEO of Alto HAPS, a subsidiary of global aerospace giant Airbus. Over the last 20 years, Airbus has been developing a stratospheric flight vehicle called Zephyr, a solar-powered aircraft with the wingspan of a passenger plane, but weighing less than the average adult. The aircraft is an engineering marvel. It can fly continuously in Earth's stratosphere for months at a time and has a service area of 7,500 square kilometers, equivalent to 250 cell phone towers on the ground. In 2023, Airbus spun out Alto HAPS into its own entity, with the goal of building a business that leverages the Zephyr platform to serve communications and Earth observation use cases. Samir Halalway, welcome to the Race to Near Space.
Thank you.
So I want to start with your career a bit. You spent over a decade working at some of the biggest names in the satellite industry, Inmarsat, OneWeb, Intelsat, others. I guess what attracted you to the HAPS space?
Well, look, I think HAPS is incredibly unique. I was at Intelsat one day, and our guys in business development came to us and started talking to us about this new concept called HAPS, and it was completely foreign to me. I'd never heard of it before. But as I learned more and more about it, I thought that that would be an incredible capability that aligns technology and economics really well to serve some use cases that we in the satellite business had been for years trying to serve, mainly on the mobile connectivity side. But we had not been very successful because that particular alignment between economics and technology did not exist. And I thought that HAPS could dramatically change this equation. So the more I learned about it, the more I got attracted to it, and I decided this is something I want to pursue.
And I guess what are those specific use cases that maybe the satellite industry can't serve well or the ground based infrastructure industry can't serve well that HAPS does unlock?
Yeah. So if you look at mobile connectivity today, right? How do you have your cellular service? Your cellular service is offered to you by the mobile operator with infrastructure that they install, everywhere. They put up base stations that consist of usually some steel structure that consists of some radio equipment on them. They have also, of course, power. So they're powered by something, either diesel in remote areas or electricity. And then they have backhaul. The backhaul is in the form of either fiber optics or microwaves that connect that base station to the rest of the network. And this is the primary way that mobile operators offer a cell service. Now, you, I don't know where you are located, Scott, but if you're, I live in Washington, D.C., just outside Washington, D.C. I have coverage, not always very good, but I have coverage pretty much everywhere close to my house by the mobile operators. And that is because there's enough base stations around that are justified from a cost point of view by the fact that there's a lot of people in that area. So those people generate revenues for the mobile operators, and as such, they invest in base stations. When you start going a bit farther, I was this past summer in Yellowstone. You'll see that many parts of Yellowstone are completely not covered. And they're not covered not because the mobile operators can't cover them from a technical point of view, but because you put those base stations or those towers and you don't get a return on your investment. There's not enough people or traffic that justifies that. So this is where there's a gap, and that's why there's many places around the world with many people that are unconnected. And when you look at the satellite world, the satellite world said, okay, you know what? There are those rural and remote areas. How can we serve them? And what can we do for the mobile operators to help them put towers in those locations that make it more compelling for them from an economic point of view? Basically, the satellite operators can pretty much only replace the fiber link or the microwave link, which is the backhaul to the rest of the network. But you still have to have the structure, have the power, and have the radio equipment. So this is where the total cost of ownership becomes quite high from a satellite point of view. Going to HAPS now, HAPS is an aircraft that is solar powered. And it's an aircraft that can act like the whole terrestrial tower, and it can replace the equivalent of about 200 towers on the ground. So, and it can do everything. It's the backward, it's the solar power which replaces the diesel, it's the radio equipment, and there's no obviously steel structure. Because of that, in areas where you are solving for coverage, where you want to provide coverage, HAPS becomes not only a great technical solution, but it becomes also a very compelling economic solution as well.
Interesting. I mean, the density point that you raise is an important one. Sort of as areas get less dense, it makes less economic sense to serve them. But of course, that the opposite of that is true too. As you get higher up, the things like latency get bigger. So how does HAPS fit in there?
And that's the beauty of HAPS is when you look at where HAPS is versus satellite, for example, HAPS is at 20 kilometers, which is about 60 to 80,000 feet. At that altitude, the HAPS or the aircraft can communicate directly with a mobile, with a standard mobile, and it can do so with a very low latency, very similar to what you would do from a terrestrial base station, under 10 milliseconds, 5 to 10 milliseconds. And you can do that with high speeds, full 5G, 4G capability. You're not missing a beat. It actually performs exactly like a tower. In some cases, even better because it's overhead, so you're not blocked by buildings or terrain. Whereas satellite, starts at 400 kilometers. That's for LEO satellites, and then you go up to 36,000 kilometers for GEO. So the signal has a lot more to travel, which means the latency is a lot higher, and the ability to get this bandwidth is pretty much impossible unless you have a big antenna on the ground. So HAPS is at the right altitude, if you want, to provide the right level of coverage. Of course, satellite provides more coverage because it's higher, but the higher up you go, the less power you have to get to those devices with the speed that you want to get to. So it's a great compromise in terms of technology and in terms of coverage.
I'm curious, as you look forward to increasing data demands, is there a limit to the capacity of data you can serve, or do you feel comfortable with the 60,000 foot altitude at which your HAPs are operating? Do you feel comfortable going forward to be able to meet growing data demands?
So look, I mean, the way we position our service is that we're going to offer capacity or coverage as a service. Okay, so mobile operators want to cover, let's say, Yellowstone. All right, they will put one aircraft that covers the whole area. So that gives you, coverage for the whole area. But let's say the capacity needs that you have increase over time because you have more people going through there and more traffic being generated and you have more videos being uploaded and all of that stuff. Then you can scale up very easily by putting another aircraft because each aircraft has a defined capability in terms of payload, and that payload, has a certain size, certain weight. Uh, if you want to increase the capacity, you have to put a bigger payload, or you just simply put a second payload. And in our case, we solved this by putting a second payload because those aircraft are quite cost efficient and they allow us to scale very easily and very efficiently because now you're scaling where you need to scale, not everywhere, and you're not covering areas that you don't really need to cover.
Yeah, and I imagine there's also an advantage to not having enduring infrastructure that uh, can't be taken away if the need decreases over time.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the challenges on LEO satellites, for example, because the LEO satellites, the way they work, they orbit Earth, you're right. So they rotate around the Earth, which means if you want to offer a service anywhere, you have to have full coverage of the Earth because those satellite, one satellite goes, the other one relays it, and what that does is, if you want to cover, let's say, Yellowstone, only Yellowstone in the world, you have to put up a global system just to cover Yellowstone. So now you're covering the North Pole, the South Pole, the oceans, everywhere uh, that you don't need to cover, just to cover one spot. I'm exaggerating, of course, with one spot. You're going to cover more than one. But the point is, there's a lot of inefficiency in the network because you have a lot of that cost of the network or the capability is deployed where you don't need it. And then when you want to scale in any particular area, you have to scale everywhere, which multiplies your cost dramatically. So in our case, we can just scale up exactly where we need so that the use of infrastructure is very efficient. And this is where, again, about the alignment between technology and economics, which makes a lot of sense perhaps.
Yeah, I do want to talk a minute about the aircraft. On this podcast, we've talked a lot about balloons thus far. So
Yeah.
excited to branch out a bit and talk about the Zephyr. I've read it's been around in one form or another for about 20 years. I wonder if you can just tell us a bit about the history of the aircraft.
Yeah, so the aircraft was designed initially by a gentleman called Chris Kelleher under the banner of a company called Kinetic, and it's a British company. And in 2013, I believe, Airbus acquired the aircraft from Kinetic and the technology and continued to develop it over a number of years. And it got to a point where in 2021, Airbus said, you know what, we have an aircraft that can do something really interesting here. It can fly for days and weeks and eventually months at a time. And this aircraft is light. It has demonstrated that it can fly overnight in the stratosphere, which is a very, very important thing to do. And we can talk more about that if you want. But they have demonstrated that they can have that longevity in the stratosphere. So what can we do with it? And there was a view at the time, a very smart view, that there's a service that can be developed out of it, a service, either a connectivity service or an Earth observation service, and those could be done in a very effective way. So the Airbus decided to carve out the project as a separate company, and they did that in July and May of 2022. I joined the company in July of 2022 to run it and to develop a services business based on that aircraft.
Yeah, I am interested in the overnight flight. So I imagine
Yeah.
that's challenging for a number of reasons. But maybe lay out the challenges for us, and then how you overcame those, or the team overcame those in building the Zephyr.
Right. So look, I mean, when you want to fly a vehicle and you want it to stay uh, overnight at a certain altitude. And why is that important? First of all, let me establish why that's important. It's important because below 60,000 feet, you have regulated airspace. So you're not allowed to be there. As simple as that. You don't want to be where you have other aircrafts flying around. So you have to be above the 60,000 feet at all times. And also because of the weather, you have a lot of weather movement below 60,000 feet. In the stratosphere, over 60,000 feet, the wind is quite lower and you don't have the storms. Now, why is that important? Because when you're designing a vehicle that has to stay in the air and provide a consistent service, that vehicle has to be light, and it has to be light enough, and it has to be powered by something. And in our case, we use the power of the sun to power up the batteries during the day, to charge the batteries during the day, fly the aircraft. And during the night, the aircraft basically loses a little bit of altitude, and it uses the power stored in the batteries. What you don't want is at dawn in the morning, when you have kind of depleted the charge in your batteries, you don't want to be below the 60,000 feet, because at that point, either you get into restricted airspace where you shouldn't be, or because then you're starting to mess with the weather. And your vehicle is so light that it usually doesn't like the weather. It's not designed to fly in storms. It's designed to glide in the stratosphere at a very high altitude. So, so that's key. And I think for us with Zephyr in particular, the key for us was that we have the right combination of performance and capability. The right balance, if you will. So in some cases, there were other projects that started, and they have not been successful. They started by saying, oh, you know what, we want to fly a payload that can serve 1 million people on the ground. That payload is 100 kilograms. So now let's design an aircraft around it. And the aircraft, as you design something for a heavy payload, becomes a lot more complex, it becomes heavier, it becomes more expensive. And when you add all of it, it becomes not doable and not realistic. And then economically, it will not be aligned with the use case that is trying to serve with those mobile markets in rural and remote areas, because the cost has become so high. So for us, I believe we have the right balance, and we have designed an aircraft that can today. We believe it can serve about 100,000 people on the ground within its coverage area, which is 7,500 square kilometers. So within that, we can serve 100,000 people. And guess what? If we want to serve another 100,000 people, we put another aircraft, because the aircraft is working, can fly, can stay in the stratosphere, and is very cost effective.
Yeah, and on that cost-effective I imagine a lot of that boils down to being able to reuse the aircraft. So could you just tell me a little bit about that, and how the aircraft launches and lands, maybe how
Yeah.
how many flight hours you anticipate these being able to log?
So look, I mean, the aircraft is a quite a the design is it would look really simple, but it's a masterpiece of engineering. It's really light. Uh, the it's 75 kilograms. I'm not used to saying that an aircraft weighs less than I do, but this one does. It has a large wingspan and has the wingspan of a closer to an Airbus 320, which is quite large. It is large. So for today, all of us were when we were little boys, we were dreaming of or playing with paper planes. It's a bit the same concept where you have five people take a few steps and throw it up in the air and it takes off. Of course, this is just for prototyping. We're developing an automatic launcher for those things. But the idea is you launch it from a location where the weather is good. You send it up to the stratosphere, and then it can go when it's in the stratosphere anywhere in the world and serve its customer base. At some point, you land it and you change the batteries because you have come to an end of life of those batteries, and then you launch it again. While you're doing that, maybe you have another one relaying it. We think that today, our aircraft will, the frame and everything will have a usable life of 5 years plus, in line with kind of small satellites and LEO satellites. The batteries have a shorter life. That's why we have to replenish every once in a while. We have to land the aircraft every once in a while. Today's batteries are 90 cycles, which means that they last us 90 days of charging and discharging. But we're working towards 200 cycles and even more in the next year or two. So this is where we are in terms of operational concept.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So you have this plane with an incredible track record. I think it's around 4,000 flight hours logged so far, um, and now you're honing in on commercial service. Hopefully later this year. What are the key challenges that you're working on now to prepare for that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a new technology, right? So new technology needs first the technology itself needs to be completely fine-tuned and working well. So we have aircraft development that is being fine-tuned as we speak, but the most important thing is the design now is at a place where it's certifiable. What you want is to certify this aircraft so that you can basically fly it anywhere at any time and over any country. We're working on a type certification with the Civil Aviation Authority of the UK, the UK CAA, and that's mainly one of the maybe the long pole of the tent here in terms of getting us into commercial service. Of course, we're also developing the payloads and the telecom type systems and networks that will allow us to offer the services that we want to offer for our customers. So bringing all of this together is yeah, is what lies ahead of us between now and full entry into service, which we anticipate to be in late 25 or early 26.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I've been reading a bit about these commercialization plans, and one thing that was super interesting to me is, you're thinking about developing. I think it was around 5 bases around the world, each of which could produce up to 50 aircraft. I'm wondering at scale, how many aircraft do you anticipate being the air at once, or what does this look like when you're up and running and serving, hundreds of thousands of customers?
Yeah, I mean, look, we think that within maybe 5 years of when we launch our service, we should have closer to 400 or 500 aircraft in the air serving customers at any given point. The idea of the 4 or 5 locations is that we want, like I said earlier, we this aircraft is designed to glide in the stratosphere. It's not designed to brace through storms and fly through hurricanes. It's in order to launch and land the aircraft, which we will do quite a bit of. We want to establish facilities where the weather is good. Now, there's no place on this planet where the weather is good, 24 hours every day of the year. It just doesn't happen. So the idea is to have 4 or 5 facilities that complement each other that together will give us uninterrupted access to the stratosphere any day of the year. And if we can launch from one, land in another, or launch from the next day from another one, when the weather permits. Again, like I said, once we get them into the stratosphere, they can operate anywhere. So that's the first concept. The second concept is we're looking to establish assembly lines that are co-located with those facilities, which we call altoports. And by doing that, then you're a lot more efficient, and you don't have shipping costs, you don't have damages in shipment of lightweight type equipment. So you're more efficient, and you're producing probably with a better cost base than you would if you were centralizing things. That's the idea, and we will be able to scale up as much as we need to. With demand, with increases in demand, we can, of course, keep producing, adding more shifts, or increasing the size of our assembly lines. So that will give us a very flexible model.
We've talked quite a bit about the connectivity use cases here, but I think another key one for Alto HAPS is Earth observation. I wonder if you could just talk to me a little bit about where that market segment is and what you think you could add to it with this technology.
Look, I think this is a market that is about to boom in the world. I think that the world is waking up more and more to the need for some form of sensing, whether it's images or videos or some sort of sensors that you put on today mainly on a satellite. In some cases on drones. Uh, the challenges that satellites have had is you have two types of satellites, and they're both low Earth orbit satellites. So they orbit, at a low altitude, about maybe 300, 400, 500 kilometers high, and they orbit around the Earth. So the challenge with satellite is because they are moving over the Earth. Either you have really big satellites that have very high resolution because they can carry big cameras, but you don't have that many of them because obviously they're costly. So those things take high resolution images and come back maybe a day later or 2 days later to the same spot and take another image. So you get high resolution images, but you don't have a persistence. You don't know what happened in between. Or you have satellites that are smaller, where you have a lot more of them, so they revisit maybe every 2 or 3 hours the same spot, but they don't have the same level of resolution. The beauty about HAPS is you don't have to compromise because you can have the very high resolution camera in most cases, uh, better than anything on even the big satellites, and you can decide what you want to be looking at. So if you want to look at a particular spot and see that the changes over time, you just keep the aircraft right over that spot, and you can observe what happened over time, not just at a one moment in time, and intermittently. So this is, I think, where HAPS can bring something that is, you know, game changing for the Earth observation market, and that would help multiple use cases like border protection, precision agriculture, forest fire management, disaster management in general. Many potential use cases.
Interesting. We've been talking a lot about sort of the limitations of satellites, and I know there are some advantages. We've talked about those as well. But given your really extensive history in the satellite industry, I guess I'm just wondering, how do you see HAPS fitting into this broader ecosystem and maybe include in that ground based infrastructure? But is this a zero sums game, or is this a rising tide lifts all boats type of situation?
It is not a zero sum game. I think what if you look today at the world, every orbit has characteristics that are really important for that orbit. Going from a terrestrial base station to a drone to a HAPS to a LEO satellite to a MEO satellite to a GEO satellite. Each one has characteristics that can serve different use cases in different ways and better than the other orbits. So GEOs, for example, nothing can replace GEOs for broadcasting. That's not nothing can do it. They have each satellite can see a third of the Earth and can provide services that the other uh, layers or different orbits cannot do really well. Leos, I think, are very good to give blanket coverage of the Earth, but blanket coverage that is a very thin capacity because there's so much capacity you can offer without the cost being so astronomical that doesn't make sense, to do anything. But again, they cannot serve mobiles well because if they connect to a mobile, they're basically doing that by text or SMS or maybe voice, maybe a few kilobits per second. Nothing very useful for the normal consumer. Could be useful for IoT type service. Uh, HAPS, we talked plenty about what HAPS can do. Of course, terrestrial, when you're in the middle of New York City, you don't put HAPS or satellite, you use a terrestrial base station because that's the one that makes the most sense. And in some cases, drones become good, but drones, again, are expensive. They need fuel. It's a whole different setup, but are very useful for different types of use cases. So I don't think that there's one orbit that wins for every use case. Depending on what the use case is, you have different uh, technologies that make more sense. And having a multi-orbit strategy is something. When I was in satellite, we were looking at what is the right multi-orbit strategy to serve our clients, and HAPS is definitely one element of it.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about sort of these different layers of connectivity. And one thing we've talked about a bit at the HAPS Alliance is this concept of hybrid connectivity. So, not only a multi orbit strategy, but potentially creating mesh networks between those orbits to just enhance the entire ecosystem. I'm wondering how Alto HAPS is thinking about that. And is there anything that you're planning or is in the pipeline to maybe bring that concept closer to reality?
Look, I think we're to answer your second question. I think right now we're open to strategic partnership, but I think everyone is racing right now to perfect their technology and offer the service. So I see this will happen more and more in the future. But what we are doing is there's different things that you can do with different entities. So, for example, with mobile operators, one, you can offer them HAPS basically the way we plan to offer it as coverage as a service for remote and rural connectivity, greenfield, closing the gap where you have white spots, for disaster management, but also for densification of networks in urban areas. So this is where the interoperability with terrestrial is quite interesting. You know, when you have 5G and 6G, you're multiplying the number of base stations dramatically. And in some cases, HAPS could be this extra layer that you add and a multi-node network, uh, where it's completely interoperable with the terrestrial base stations. So you can use it even for densification of urban areas. On the satellite side, I think what's interesting is the HAPS can act also like a satellite in Q band or V band, because it's payload agnostic. You can put whatever payload you want on it. And all of a sudden, you have like a satellite that is much closer to the Earth, that has so much bandwidth because you're putting, some decent amount of high end spectrum in it, and it's close enough for that spectrum to close the gap with the antennas. But what's interesting is about the satellite is that you can change the payload every day if you want. You can land it, change the payload, change the mission, put it back up. You can have it fixed over a certain location, or you can have it flexible and moving and tracking a certain asset. For example, you can provide connectivity to a cruise ship by having the aircraft follow the cruise ship along the way. So that's very interesting. And then you start thinking about things like, well, you know what? I want to take images in the middle of nowhere, but I don't want a gateway in the coverage area. I want to backhaul that traffic through satellite. And this is something that we're also working on. So we're working on a laser comms payload that will allow us, once we have our second version of the aircraft that can carry two payloads, to take whatever signal, whether it's connectivity signal or an Earth observation signal, and backhaul it either through satellite, LEO satellites in particular, or through other HABs in order to get it to its final destination. So I see a lot of mesh networks in the future that consist of terrestrial towers, HABs, and satellite that all work together somehow.
Interesting. I guess I'm curious. There's a ton of research development going on right now in the HAPS industry. It seems like you all are one of the closest to commercializing this technology. But just look ahead 10 years for me. What does the entire industry look like?
Look, I think the ecosystem will develop better. Having other players, be successful in their design, because an aircraft like this, it's not simple, right? I mean, we talked about the timeline of when this project started with Airbus, and if anything, Airbus does incredibly well is build aircraft. So, with a lot of development from the best aircraft manufacturer, it took a number of years to have a prototype pretty much get to that level of maturity that it needed to get to so that you can have a final design that is certifiable. So I think in 10 years, we will have more aircraft that are ready for certification, that are, making it through the rounds. And that ecosystem will be good for everybody because it will allow all of us to drive, a supply chain, a healthy supply chain that is incentivized to create products for us. In particular, batteries, solar panels, those things that the more you have, a volume of demand, the lower those prices go, and the lower those prices go, the more markets, or the more efficient our vehicles and our products will be, and the more markets we will be able to serve.
I guess looking a little bit closer into the future, if you had to pick one key business challenge and one key technical challenge that you all need to solve over the next 12, 18, 24 months to get to commercialization, what would those be?
Look, I think the business challenge would be to uh, kind of demonstrate to our customer base that this is not a pipe dream. This is a technology that works, and you should bet on it. Mobile operators typically don't plan, years ahead on their networks. So we're building this and working with some mobile operators to demonstrate the capability. But to get that mass attraction and mass scale adoption, this will require a little bit of demonstrating to do for mobile operators. So that would be the business challenge. I think the technical challenge is, of course, having those locations around the world where you can establish kind of a cadence of flights, up and down flights, without being impacted by the weather, and being able to perfect this. If you look at, I always give the example of SpaceX, how they perfected the landing of the first stage of the rocket, which is such an important element in their business. It makes them so much more efficient. That was not done overnight, right? It took a number of trials, and it took a lot of mastering to do. But now it's a given. Nobody talks about it. They do that so successfully. No one even mentions it anymore. So in a way, it's a bit similar to that.
Got it. And last question for you. And I know you're on your way to MWC right now, and given your extensive history in the satellite industry, I'm sure it's not your first go around, and you probably know all the best restaurants in Barcelona at this point. But what does Alto Haps have planned for the conference?
Look, I mean, it's meetings, meetings, and more meetings, and it's the days are full. I think in our stand, we'll have a small model of Zephyr. Last year, we had a full model of an aircraft that flew a few years back. We had it right over the stand, and that was an attraction, in the event. So, establishing more contacts with customers, signing some agreements that we have in the pipeline. So quite a bit of work. We're going to be pretty busy next week.
Great. Well, safe travels to Barcelona, and Samir Halawi, thank you for joining us on the Race to Near Space.
Thank you very much.